Grace sat on the edge of her old bed, staring at the small pile of money in her hands. It wasn't enough. Not even close. She sighed deeply as she looked around the room. The walls were cracked, and the paint was peeling off. Rain leaked from the ceiling whenever it poured. The house felt cold, both inside and outside. Her twin daughters, Emily and Sophie, were sitting quietly at the table, doing their homework under the dim light of a small lamp. Grace wiped her face with her hand. She was tired. Every day she worked hard, cleaning people's homes from morning till evening, but the money she earned could barely pay for food, let alone school fees. Emily and Sophie were bright girls. They loved school, and their teachers always praised them. But now, their school had sent a letter saying she needed to pay the new term's fees or the girls would not be allowed to return. Grace folded the letter and placed it inside her bag. She stood up and walked to the table. "Girls, I'm going to see Aunt Claire," she said softly. "I'll be back soon. Please finish your homework and go to bed." "Yes, Mum," the girls replied in unison. Grace put on her old sweater and stepped outside into the cool evening. The streets were quiet, and the streetlights flickered. Claire's house wasn't far. As she walked, Grace thought about her life. Her husband, David, had left them 3 years ago without saying goodbye. Since then, she had done everything on her own. She felt lonely, but she kept going because of her daughters. When she reached Claire's house, she knocked gently on the door. Claire opened it, smiling brightly. "Grace, what a surprise! Come in." Grace stepped inside and sat on the worn-out couch. "Claire, I don't know who else to talk to," she began. "I'm really struggling. Emily and Sophie's school fees are due. I don't have enough. I've been working extra hours, but it's still not enough." Claire listened quietly, nodding. "Oh, Grace," she said, "I wish I could help. Things have been tight for me too." Grace's heart sank a little, but she tried to smile. "I understand. I just needed someone to talk to." They chatted for a while, sipping tea. Claire tried to encourage her, but something in Claire's eyes made Grace uneasy. There was a hidden sadness, or was it guilt? Grace wasn't sure. Later that night, Grace walked back home under the moonlight. She felt lighter for having shared her worries, but deep down, she knew tomorrow would bring the same struggles. As she lay in bed, listening to the soft breathing of her daughters, she prayed silently. "God, please make a way for us," she whispered. "Please help me take care of my girls." With that prayer, she closed her eyes, holding on to hope even in the middle of her desperate situation. The next morning, Grace woke up early as usual. She prepared breakfast for Emily and Sophie before heading out for work. As she packed their school bags, she reminded herself she needed to find a way to pay their fees before the week ended. "I'll think of something," she told herself, though worry sat heavy in her chest. Later that afternoon, while she was cleaning a client's house, her phone rang. It was Claire. "Hi, Claire," Grace answered, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Grace, can you come over?" "I need to talk to you," Claire said, sounding nervous. "Okay, I'll come after work," Grace replied. When she arrived at Claire's house that evening, something felt different. The door wasn't locked. Grace stepped inside quietly. "Claire," she called. No answer. She walked further into the living room and froze. There, sitting on the couch, was David, her husband. Next to him sat Claire. Their hands were close, almost touching. The moment they saw Grace, they jumped apart. Grace's heart pounded in her chest. "David, what are you doing here?" With Claire?" she asked, her voice shaking. David stood up, rubbing the back of his neck. "Grace, I've been staying here for a while," he admitted. "Claire and we've been seeing each other." Grace felt as if the ground under her feet disappeared. You're cheating on me?" "With my best friend." Claire looked down, unable to meet her eyes. "Grace, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." David's face hardened. "Look, Grace, you've never been enough for me. I needed more. Claire understands me in ways you never could." Those words cut deep into Grace's heart. She stood there, silent, tears welling in her eyes. She thought about all the nights she waited for David to come home, all the prayers she had made for their family. And this was how he repaid her. "I gave you everything I had, David," she whispered. "Everything?" David shrugged. "I'm moving on, Grace. You should too." Claire spoke softly. "Grace, please don't hate me." Grace turned and walked away. She didn't say another word. Her body felt numb as she stepped out into the night. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she kept walking. When she reached home, Emily and Sophie ran to her. "Mum, you're back," they said happily. Grace forced a smile. "Yes, my darlings. I'm back." That night, after putting them to bed, she sat alone in the dark. Her chest ached, but she refused to let bitterness take root. "I may be broken, but I'm not finished," she whispered to herself. "I will raise my girls. I will stand strong." Outside, the stars twinkled in the sky, and inside, Grace's heart slowly began to heal, even as the pain remained. The morning sun rose gently over the town as Grace opened the windows of their small home. A cool breeze brushed her face. She looked at Emily and Sophie, who were still sleeping peacefully in their beds. For a moment, she watched them, feeling a mix of sadness and determination. She knew she couldn't rely on anyone. David was gone. Claire had betrayed her. But her daughters needed her, and she would never give up. That day, as she walked to work, Grace made a decision. She needed to find a way to give Emily and Sophie a better future, even if it meant letting go of the house she had called home for years. Later that evening, after feeding the girls and helping them with homework, Grace sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen. She wrote down everything she owned. The house was the only thing of real value. It wasn't much, but it was something. "I'll sell the house," she whispered aloud. "With the money, I can pay for the girls' school fees and maybe rent a small place." The next day, she visited a local property agent. The man looked over her house papers and nodded. "I can help you sell it quickly, Grace. But the price won't be very high." "Are you sure about this?" Grace swallowed hard. She thought about the leaking roof, the broken windows, the cracked walls. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm sure." A week later, the house was sold. The money wasn't much, but it was enough to cover Emily and Sophie's school fees for the next few years and still leave a little extra. The girls were excited when Grace told them they could continue school. "Thank you, Mum," Emily said, hugging her tightly. Sophie added, "We'll work hard and make you proud." Grace smiled, her heart full of love. "That's all I want, my darlings. Just do your best." But selling the house meant they had nowhere permanent to live. Grace found a small half-finished building nearby. It had no windows, and the walls weren't painted, but it had a roof. She rented it for a small price. She cleaned it as best as she could, covering the holes with old clothes and newspapers. "This is our new home," she told the girls. "It's not perfect, but it's ours for now." Emily and Sophie looked around. "It's okay, Mum," Emily said cheerfully. "We'll help make it nice." Sophie nodded. "It's better than no home at all." That night, as they sat together on an old mattress, eating simple bread and tea, Grace felt a small spark of hope inside her. She had lost a lot: her husband, her friend, her home. But she hadn't lost her faith, her strength, or her love for her daughters. And as the stars twinkled outside, Grace knew this was the start of a new beginning. She whispered a quiet prayer. "Lord, thank you for helping me take this step. Please guide me on the next." And with that, she closed her eyes, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring. A few weeks passed since Grace and her daughters moved into the half-finished building. Every day, Grace worked harder than ever. She cleaned houses, washed clothes, and even helped at a small food shop in the evenings. Still, the money was barely enough for food, rent, and school supplies. One evening, as Grace walked home carrying a small bag of rice, she saw a familiar car parked outside their building. It was Mr. Carter, an old family friend. He stepped out and smiled warmly. "Grace, it's been a long time," he greeted her. Grace wiped her hands on her skirt and smiled politely. "Hello, Mr. Carter." "Yes, it's been a while. Please come in." Inside, Emily and Sophie were reading their school books on the floor. They quickly stood up and greeted him. Mr. Carter looked around the small room. His eyes softened. "Grace, "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" he said kindly. Grace sat down and sighed. "It hasn't been easy, but we're managing, sir." He nodded slowly. "I heard about David. And Claire. I'm sorry for what they did to you." "Thank you," Grace replied quietly. After a pause, Mr. Carter leaned forward. "Grace, I've been thinking. You're a strong woman, but you shouldn't suffer like this. I can help you." Grace's eyes lit up with hope. "Really, sir? You would help us?" "Yes," he said, smiling. "I can pay for Emily and Sophie's school fees. I can even help you move to a better place." Grace felt her heart lift. "Oh, Mr. Carter, thank you so much," she said gratefully. But then, Mr. Carter's smile changed. He leaned closer. "But Grace, you'll need to do something for me too." Grace froze. "What do you mean, sir?" Mr. Carter looked serious. "I'm a lonely man, Grace. I want you to be with me. If you agree, I'll take care of everything." Grace stared at him, shocked. "You want me to be your woman?" "Yes, Grace. It's a fair offer. Think about it. You and your girls will never have to suffer again." Grace stood up slowly. Her hands were trembling. "Mr. Carter, I can't do that. I won't." "Grace, don't be foolish," he said, frowning. "This is your chance." "No," Grace said firmly. "I won't sell myself, not even for my daughters. There must be another way." Mr. Carter shook his head and stood up. "You'll regret this, Grace. I won't offer again." Grace watched as he walked out the door and drove away. Her chest felt heavy, but deep down she knew she had made the right choice. Emily walked to her mother and hugged her waist. "Mom, are you okay?" Grace smiled faintly and stroked her daughter's hair. "Yes, my love. I'm okay." She sat down beside her girls and looked into their bright, hopeful faces. "We may be poor," she whispered, "but we'll never lose our dignity." That night, as the wind blew through the cracks in their small home, Grace felt a quiet strength rising inside her. She didn't know how things would work out, but she knew she would never give up. The next morning, Grace woke up early, even though she hadn't slept much. Her mind kept thinking about Mr. Carter's offer. She had felt tempted for a moment, imagining a better life for Emily and Sophie, but she knew deep down that it wasn't the right way. As she watched her daughters get ready for school, she smiled softly. "I made the right choice," she whispered to herself. "Mom, are you okay?" Emily asked as she packed her books. "I'm fine, my love," Grace replied. "Now go and do your best at school." After the girls left, Grace sat down at the small table. She opened the envelope holding the money from selling the house. It wasn't much, but it would cover the school fees for a few more years if she used it wisely. She stood up and went to the school that day. She paid the fees in full and left the school office feeling lighter. "At least they won't be sent home again," she said with relief. But she knew the road ahead would still be hard. They were living in a half-finished building with no proper windows. Rainwater sometimes leaked inside. The nights were cold. But her daughters never complained. They laughed, studied, and helped her with small chores. One afternoon, after finishing her cleaning jobs, Grace returned home to find Emily and Sophie sweeping the floor. They had hung old cloths over the window holes to block the wind. "Look, Mum," Sophie said excitedly. "We made curtains from the old clothes you gave us." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "My clever girls," she said, hugging them tightly. They sat together on the floor, sharing a simple meal of rice and beans. Grace watched them eat and felt proud. "I may not have riches," she thought, "but I have love. And that's more valuable than anything." A few days later, the landlord of the half-finished building came to see her. "Grace, you're a good tenant," he said. "But I need the building for something else. You have to move out by the end of the month." Grace's heart sank. "Please, sir. I don't have anywhere else to go." "I'm sorry, Grace. That's just how it is," the landlord replied. After he left, Grace sat quietly, thinking hard. She couldn't let her daughters suffer on the streets. She needed a plan. That night, as she lay on the mattress beside Emily and Sophie, she stared at the ceiling. "I've come this far," she whispered. "I won't give up now." She remembered a woman she once worked for who had a small shop. Maybe she could ask if there were any jobs there. Or perhaps she could find a place to sell snacks or fruits. The next morning, Grace tied her scarf around her head and held Emily and Sophie's hands tightly. "Girls," she said, "we might not have a house soon. But don't worry. I'm going to find a way. I promise." Emily looked up at her mother and smiled. "We believe you, Mum." Sophie nodded. "We're with you." And as they walked down the dusty road together, Grace felt a new determination rise inside her. No matter how hard life became, she would keep fighting. For Emily. For Sophie. For their future. The next few weeks were some of the hardest Grace had ever faced. After being told they had to leave the half-finished building, she moved into a small rented room above a local shop. It was cramped, but it was better than nothing. Emily and Sophie slept on a small mattress, and Grace shared the room with them. Each day, Grace woke up early to do her cleaning jobs. She worked long hours, but no matter how hard she tried, the money never seemed enough. She would return home exhausted, but always with a smile for her daughters. "We'll make it through this, Mum," Emily would say whenever Grace looked too tired. "I know we will, darling," Grace would reply, even though she sometimes doubted it herself. But the girls never complained. They continued to study hard, determined to make their mother proud. Grace knew they had dreams, big dreams. Emily wanted to become a doctor, and Sophie dreamed of being an engineer. Grace would do anything to help them achieve those dreams. She ran into Mrs. Bennet, a kind woman she had worked for years ago. "Grace, I didn't recognize you at first," Mrs. Bennet exclaimed when she saw her. "You've been working so hard, haven't you?" Grace smiled tiredly. "Yes, Mrs. Bennet. Life has been tough, but we're managing." Mrs. Bennet looked at her closely. "If you're looking for more work, I could use some help at my shop. I'm short on staff. It won't pay much, but it's something. What do you think?" Grace's heart skipped a beat. "I would love to, Mrs. Bennet." "Thank you so much." Mrs. Bennet smiled. "It's the least I can do for all the work you did for me before." And so, Grace started working part-time at Mrs. Bennet's small shop. It wasn't much, but the extra money helped. More importantly, it gave her a sense of stability. Emily and Sophie were able to continue their studies, and Grace could pay for their school supplies. But things weren't always easy. There were still many days when Grace worried about the future. Would she ever be able to afford a proper home for her family? Would Emily and Sophie ever get the opportunities they deserved? One day, as Grace walked back to the room after a long day at work, Emily and Sophie met her at the door. "Mum, we got a letter from the school," Sophie said excitedly. Grace smiled. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emily handed her the letter, her eyes sparkling. "It's a scholarship. We both got scholarships to a special summer program for advanced students." Grace gasped in surprise. "You mean, both of you?" "Yes," Emily said. "We're going to learn so much, Mum." Tears filled Grace's eyes as she hugged her daughters tightly. "I'm so proud of you both," she whispered. The girls had worked hard, and now their hard work was paying off. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. That night, as Grace lay in bed with her daughters, she felt a deep sense of peace. "I don't know what the future holds," she thought. "But I know we're getting there, step by step." And even though the road was still hard, Grace knew she wasn't alone. She had Emily and Sophie. She had love. And with that, they could face anything. The summer program brought a new energy to their lives. Emily and Sophie were excited to learn new things, and Grace was relieved that they were getting a chance to grow. Still, life outside of the program remained difficult. Grace continued working at Mrs. Bennet's shop, and the little money she earned helped cover their basic needs. The room they rented was small, and though they tried to make it feel like home, it never truly felt stable. One day, while Grace was on her way home from work, a kind old woman stopped her. "Excuse me, are you Grace?" she asked with a warm smile. Grace nodded. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Williams, an elderly woman who lived in the neighborhood. "I've seen you working hard, and I know you're struggling," Mrs. Williams said. "I have a small house nearby. I live alone, and I would love to offer you and your daughters a place to stay. You can live with me for as long as you need." Grace felt her heart swell with gratitude. "You would do that for us?" Mrs. Williams smiled gently. "Of course. You're a good mother, and I can see how much you love your girls. I have the space, and it's better than staying in that small room." Tears welled up in Grace's eyes as she accepted the offer. "Thank you, Mrs. Williams. We don't know how to repay you. Just take care of your daughters. That's all I ask." That evening, Grace shared the news with Emily and Sophie. They were overjoyed at the idea of having a new place to stay. "Mom, you did it," Emily said, her eyes shining. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Sophie asked. Grace hugged them both. "Yes, darling. We're going to be just fine." Moving into Mrs. Williams' house brought a sense of peace to their lives. It was the first time in a long while that Grace felt truly at home. She couldn't believe how kind a stranger had been to them. For the first time in a while, Grace allowed herself to feel hopeful for the future. Time passed quickly. Emily and Sophie continued to excel in school, and Grace worked hard at the shop and around the house. Mrs. Williams, who had become like a grandmother to the girls, was always there to offer advice and a kind word. Life was slowly improving, but Grace still worried about the future. One day, as Grace was cleaning, she received a call. It was from Emily's school. "I have some wonderful news," the voice on the other end said. "Your daughter has been selected as the top student in her class. She has earned a scholarship to attend university." Grace's heart raced with excitement. "A scholarship? Oh, thank you. Thank you so much," she said, her voice shaking with happiness. When Grace shared the news with Emily and Sophie, they screamed with joy. "I'm going to university," Emily shouted, hugging her mother tightly. "Mom, we're going to make our dreams come true." Sophie jumped up and down. "We'll be together forever, Mom. We're going to be okay." Grace wiped away her tears. "I'm so proud of you both. This is just the beginning." A few months later, Emily and Sophie both graduated from high school with honors. It was a proud moment for Grace. The girls were now on their way to university, their hard work and dreams finally beginning to come true. Grace stood with them at the graduation ceremony, tears of joy in her eyes. "We made it," she whispered. "You made it." That evening, they celebrated together with Mrs. Williams, who had come to support them. "I always knew you girls would make it far," she said, raising her glass. "You've worked so hard, and now you're ready for the next chapter." Grace smiled, looking at her daughters and the woman who had been so kind to them. "This is the happiest day of my life," she said. "We've come so far, and now the future looks bright." As they raised their glasses to a new beginning, Grace knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their journey was just beginning, and she was ready to see where it would take them. It was a few weeks after the graduation celebrations, and life had finally started to feel like it was falling into place. Emily and Sophie were settling into university, and Grace was beginning to breathe easier. But deep inside, she still carried the heavy weight of the past. One evening, as Grace was making dinner, Emily and Sophie sat down together, looking serious. "Mom, we've been talking," Emily began, "and we think it's time we ask you about Dad." Grace paused, her hands shaking slightly as she stirred the pot on the stove. She had always tried to shield her daughters from the pain of their father's betrayal. But now, they were old enough to understand. "I know it's hard to talk about," Emily said softly, "but we want to know what happened. Why did Dad leave us?" Grace sighed deeply and sat down at the table. The past had always been something she tried to forget, but now, her daughters needed answers. "He left because he didn't love me anymore," Grace began, her voice trembling. "But there was more. He had an affair with a woman I thought was my friend. And when I found out, he didn't even care. He said things that still hurt me today." Emily and Sophie listened in silence, their eyes wide with shock. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Sophie asked, her voice quiet. Grace wiped away a tear. "I didn't want to burden you with it. I wanted you to focus on your dreams, not on the mistakes your father made." Emily took Grace's hand. "We understand now, Mum. We just want to know everything, so we can understand what you went through. We know you were strong for us, but it must have been so hard." "It was," Grace admitted. "But I had to keep going. For you too." Sophie hugged her mother tightly. "We love you, Mum. And we're proud of you." Grace hugged them back, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, my loves. I've always done my best for you, and I will continue to. No matter what." As they sat there together, Grace realized that, although the past was painful, it no longer controlled her. The future was ahead of them, bright and full of promise. The days after their conversation were filled with mixed emotions. Grace had shared her painful past with Emily and Sophie, and while it had been difficult, it felt like a weight had been lifted. But the question of their father still hung in the air. One evening, as Grace was cleaning the dishes, Emily turned to her. "Mum, we've been thinking. We know what Dad did was wrong, but we feel like we should try to forgive him." Grace looked at her daughters in surprise. "Forgive him? After everything he did to us?" Sophie nodded. "Yes, Mum. We know it's hard, but we believe that forgiveness will help us move forward. It will help us heal." Grace sat down slowly, her heart torn. Forgiveness was never easy, especially after all the hurt. But she also knew that holding on to anger would only keep her stuck. She had spent so many years focusing on surviving and protecting her daughters. Maybe now, it was time to heal. "I don't know if I can forgive him," Grace said, her voice shaky. "But I want you both to know I'll support whatever decision you make." Emily reached for her mother's hand. "We think he deserves a second chance, even if he was wrong." "It's not for him, Mum. It's for us, to let go of the past and find peace." Grace looked at her daughters, who were growing into young women with big hearts. She realized that their strength was now giving her strength. She had taught them to dream big, and now they were teaching her to let go. Over the next few days, Grace wrote a letter to David, her ex-husband. She had never thought she would speak to him again, but it felt like the right time. In her letter, she told him that she had forgiven him, not for his sake, but for her own, and for Emily and Sophie. A few weeks later, David called. His voice sounded different, quieter, almost regretful. "Grace," he said, "I got your letter. I don't know what to say, except that I'm sorry. I was wrong to leave you the way I did." Grace's heart fluttered. "Thank you, David. I'm not doing this for you, but for us. For the future." It wasn't easy, but she could feel a sense of peace growing within her. She had forgiven him, and now she could move forward without the burden of anger. Months passed after Grace's decision to forgive David. Life seemed to settle into a new rhythm. Emily and Sophie were thriving at university, and Grace was working hard to support them, all while trying to build a life she could be proud of. But one rainy afternoon, everything changed. Grace received a phone call from the police. The voice on the other end was serious. "This is Officer Miller. We need you to come down to the station. There's something we need to talk to you about concerning your ex-husband." Panic gripped Grace's heart. "What happened to David?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Please come in as soon as you can," the officer replied before hanging up. Grace felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She immediately called Emily and Sophie, telling them that she needed to go to the police station. They both agreed to meet her there as soon as possible. At the police station, Officer Miller sat them down. "We have some troubling news about David," he began. "He's been accused of a serious crime, one that he didn't commit." Grace's mind raced. What kind of crime? What's going on? Officer Miller hesitated before speaking. "David has been wrongly accused of a crime that happened several years ago. The real culprit, a man named Mr. Williams, has been covering his tracks for a long time. David was framed." Grace's heart sank. David had always seemed like a broken man, but to hear that he had been innocent of such a serious charge was a shock. "How do you know this?" Emily asked, her voice firm and curious. "We've been investigating the case, and new evidence has come to light. We now know that David had no involvement. Mr. Williams is the one behind it all." Grace couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man who had caused so much pain for their family had been innocent all along. "How can we help him?" she asked, tears welling up in her eyes. "We are working on getting him out of jail, but we need your help." If you can provide any information or evidence that can help clear his name, it will make all the difference." The world seemed to stop for a moment. David, the man who had hurt them all so deeply, was innocent. Now, it was time for Grace and her daughters to help him get the justice he deserved. "Of course we'll help," Emily said, her voice full of determination. Sophie nodded. "We have to do the right thing. For the sake of the truth." As Grace sat in the police station, her heart filled with mixed emotions, anger, confusion, and the strange feeling of redemption. They had to fight for David's freedom now, not for him, but for the truth. The weeks that followed were filled with intense work. Grace, Emily, and Sophie dug through old documents, finding proof that David had been framed by Mr. Williams. The evidence was undeniable. Together with the police, they worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. Finally, after a long battle in court, David was released from prison. The judge declared that the charges against him were false, and the real criminal, Mr. Williams, was sentenced to life imprisonment for his crimes. When Grace received the news, she was overwhelmed with emotions. She had never expected to be here, fighting for David's freedom, but they had done it. They had uncovered the truth. As soon as David was free, he called Grace. His voice, though still full of regret, was filled with gratitude. "Grace, I don't know how to thank you. You and the girls didn't owe me this. I was wrong, and I can never make up for the pain I caused." Grace took a deep breath, her heart heavy with mixed feelings. "You don't need to thank me, David. We did it for the truth. For the girls. They deserve to know their father isn't guilty." Emily and Sophie stood by Grace, ready to help their father heal, even though it wasn't easy. "We want to help you start over, Dad," Emily said. "We'll support you. But first, you need to prove you can change." David nodded, tears in his eyes. "I know. I've lost so much, but I'll do whatever it takes to make things right with you." Grace watched as David spoke to their daughters. For the first time in a long time, she saw a glimmer of the man he once was, the man she had fallen in love with. He had made so many mistakes, but this was a chance for redemption, and she wouldn't stand in the way of that. Over the next few months, David worked hard to rebuild his life. He found a job and began to make amends, not just with Grace and the girls, but with everyone he had hurt. The road to healing wasn't easy, but Grace knew that this was a step in the right direction. As the family began to rebuild, Grace found peace in knowing that they had faced the past, found the truth, and forgiven each other. Their journey wasn't over, but they were stronger, united by love and understanding. And as she watched Emily and Sophie graduate from university, she felt an overwhelming sense of pride. They had achieved their dreams, and so had she. Grace had fought for them, for their future, and now they were ready for whatever lay ahead. Together, they had found a new beginning, a future full of hope, love, and endless possibilities. Subscribe now to enjoy more interesting videos.